Okay, today I have with me Alex Gould. Alex is the co-founder and CEO of AltCollective. AltCollective is a really innovative recruiting company that helps startups and different companies in the food industry to find talent and improve their products and move forward. I will have introduced you, Alex, before the call, but maybe just for everybody that's listening, you want to shortly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to be what you're doing what you're doing now.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. Happy to be here today. So I my career starting actually really early on as working in the food industry. I grew up neighboring the Bronx, and my neighbor had a restaurant in City Island, which is a coastal area of the Bronx that I started bussing tables at when I was about 13 or 14 years old. Ended up just working through there through my early stage of my adolescence. Started serving, bartending, managing. Then I went on to hotel and restaurant management school at Johnson Wells in Rhode Island. And I just always had this affinity and passion to be in the food industry. I worked for a couple well-known restaurateurs throughout the country, ultimately landed in San Diego about a decade ago and launched my own food truck. Fast forward 8 years, ended up selling about 10 food trucks and about 5 brick and mortar restaurants to a venture-backed chef out of Mexico City. And from there, I became fairly close with that family. And what I learned is that they had their arms extended into a number of different projects scattered throughout CPG. And a handful of them were in the alternative protein sector. So it was
Yeah.
really interesting watching from afar what they were doing and how they were involved. And ultimately, they asked if I would be interested in consulting with them for a little bit on each of their projects. So this 2-month consulting gig ended up being about a 2-year process into the beginning of COVID, where I learned a lot about the industry, the investment side of the industry. But I really got to see firsthand the importance of putting together dynamic teams and what happens when you can't find the right talent, and then the best ways to go to market to really showcase your company, your team, your culture to attract the right people. So I started interviewing with different recruitment companies throughout the country, trying to
Mhm.
find best practices and really understand that side of the industry to position myself as a conduit between the investor, the organization, and the talent in the market. What I came to find out was that recruitment is a very transactional industry, and that was not something I necessarily was excited to be a part of. So I began to really do a deep dive into some of the agencies that were doing things in the right way, rather, with a white glove approach. And I was fortunate enough to find a company in South Florida called Protus Global, where I began working with them. I brought this thesis to them that I could build out a vertical within food technology, focusing on companies that are looking to secure the food system through different production methodologies and more sustainable efforts to enhance what you and I consume every day.
Mhm.
So after 2 years of working with them, I decided to venture out on my own with my partner Dave to create Alt Collective, which we look at as a microcosm of being a part of the community, not just necessarily a service provider serving the community, but to really be a part of the community within the alternative protein sector. And being that connective tissue within the space allowed us to really make a name for ourselves fairly quickly, promoting the companies that we are working with through a number of different ways. But more so than anything else was modernizing the archaic approach that traditional recruitment has to the industry. I know that was
Okay.
a lot. So if you need me to
No,
repeat
no,
it,
it's good. I
no,
definitely I want to unpack the different method of recruiting and also why protein in a little bit later. But first, I'm really interested in the food truck, the start of the
sure.
story. So 10 years ago, I mean, I haven't lived in the US for 15 years, right? I mean, the last place I lived was Northern California, but I think this whole food truck phenomenon, at least I wasn't aware of it when I left Palo Alto in 2007, right? But I didn't live in SoCal, right?
Okay.
So, but doing it 10 years ago must have been a little bit the early days of the food truck phenomenon, or perhaps I'm off base on that. Yeah.
No, absolutely right. We definitely weren't the ones that started it, but we were very, very early in the space. I actually believe I am in a number of people's phone as the San Diego food truck guy, because I would
Yeah.
help them get through the health department, create their menus, train their staff. So it became a little side hustle that I had, was consulting with a lot of early stage food truck founders as well. You know,
Yeah.
everyone's grandmother makes the best meatball sandwich, and then they wanted to make a food truck that followed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So that was typically the cadence of operation when it came to that. But yeah,
And
to your point, definitely was part of the earlier in the game at an earlier stage, and learned a lot, especially in San Diego. Is not like LA where you can really pull up to any street corner, flip up your hood, and start serving. San Diego, you needed permits wherever you went. You needed to get approval from the city. So we quickly pivoted to partner with private companies. So we partnered with breweries and used their patios as our dining rooms. So it became quite a lucrative business for us.
awesome. And then I mean, I think you said 10 food trucks and 5 restaurants. That's
Yeah,
not a
so we had a
small
lot of
operation.
yeah. We consulted, managed, leased or owned so anywhere at any given time between 10 and 15 trucks in the city.
Okay.
Some of those were private catering. Some of those were the same format that I mentioned earlier of partnering with breweries throughout the city, and some were just ones that were floating around the city, hitting up corners after working through some of the permitting issues that ultimately kind of sank the food truck scene in San Diego. But yeah, it was a fun ride. Once we started seeing some success, we thought venturing in some brick and mortars would make a lot of sense for us. So we started getting into some of the food halls that were popping open in Southern California, as well as some just independently owned stores.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So protein, right? Like, sound very interesting that you recognize that protein and alternative protein would be an interesting niche. What about those early days gave you that intuition, that would
Well,
be the area to focus on, right?
yeah. It wasn't really until I sold the company that I realized how much damage I was actually doing. I mean,
Mm,
we had a burger truck that was doing thousands of burgers a week.
mm,
And it took me looking over the shoulders of some scientists and engineers to see what they were working on,
mm,
to put myself in a place of reflection to really understand the damage that I was causing.
mm.
So at that point, I changed everything: my lifestyle, my eating habits, what I wanted to do professionally, and really took a turn to focus my attention on companies that are trying to better our food system through the creation of alternative protein.
Okay. Okay, cool. So now you're building this business based on the backs of all types of investment and growth in the alternative protein space. Are you focused mostly on the US or global? And so like tell us a little bit about like your scope of operation and your scope of influence with this, because I do think it's a very interesting niche. I mean, we're a little bit adjacent um, to that space. At FlavorWiki, we do some research in the area, but for sure, I've seen more and more just people present in the ecosystem that have the background of working in alternative or plant-based or different types of protein innovation, where when I started the company in 2017, it was kind of just something you sort of talked about, like, oh yeah, there's this company, Impossible Foods, isn't that kind of interesting? But now there just seems to be a lot more people that are leveraging backgrounds in biotechnology or medicine in different areas to get into this. So, tell us a little bit about your footprint and where you focus and what's different, right,
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we are agnostic in geography. Our
Okay.
our goal is to work with mission aligned companies,
Mm,
companies who are looking at our food system, seeing some opportunity, and building teams and infrastructure and technologies to improve that.
Mhm.
So when it comes to who we work with and where they're located, we have clients all over North America, Asia. We just closed up a few roles throughout Europe and Israel. So we are really agnostic in our approach. It's the process that is really differentiating, not necessarily the location. Right.
Okay.
We have all these tools at our disposal now through traditional means of recruiting, through new innovative and AI driven means of recruitment. So, location, although may seem to a founder to be a bit of a roadblock, it's really on them, right? Are they open to relocation? Are they open to bringing someone on through a visa? And if they are, the world's our oyster. They can really have their selection of candidates from any background, any city throughout the world.
Okay, cool. Now, I think we see in the consumer space, you're one of them, it sounds like, people converting in terms of behavioral differences or behavioral change in order to meet what they believe is a bit of a responsibility, but also just like an ethical position of, consuming less real meat, not impacting the environment as much there. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps what you've seen on the side of professional decisions that people are making coming out of university or coming out of traditional roles in other companies into this space, and how that's manifesting itself, and like what are their motivations? Are they
Yeah.
interested in changing and taking a step down in pay or in rank? Like what sort of I wish I would say, like, mission-driven behaviors do you see amongst the employees, the people that are seeking jobs? Because obviously, I think as an individual, you can have a lot more impact on the sustainability mission of the food ecosystem than you can as an individual consumer, right? Like you can actually get behind it and, make a company successful or not successful, or help find a better product market fit and so I can imagine that there's a lot of this mission-driven thinking amongst the workforce in this
There
area. Right?
is. There
Yeah.
is. And it comes from the catalyst of being greenwashed. A
Mm,
lot of individuals working with, I'm not going to throw any names under the bus here, but larger consumer packaged goods and food companies that are, putting out papers and saying one thing, but doing another. A lot of those folks who join those teams under uh, different pretenses are now eager at
mm,
to take those lessons, those experiences, all the tools and resources that they have at their disposal, and bring them to some of these earlier stage, well-funded companies.
mm,
Are they going to take a pay cut? Are they going to take a drop in title? Maybe.
mm,
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It really depends on the company's case by case basis, but at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a lot of, call it director level and above executives,
mm,
are excited to bring their set of skills to an operation that needs someone like them. And you can really understand the root of who they're going after by looking at the internal capabilities of the current team that they have. So if
mm,
you're a founder and you're a scientific based founder, how far can that individual founder take it until they really need to commercialize and get the skill level and expertise that is required to scale to meet their commitments that they've made to their investors, right?
mm,
So a lot of the times what we're seeing is there's so much excitement about the idea of transitioning from a large corporate to a smaller startup, and
mm.
it's the big fish small pond mentality.
Right. Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Also, I won't name any names though at big food companies, but just big companies, I think move
Yeah.
slower, and particularly people of this younger generation. I mean, I'm older myself now, in the late 40s. I think that they want to have more impact, but they also want to move quicker. And you know, maybe you don't need to have these blue chip companies so much on your resume anymore, because like a lot of these young startups are becoming the blue chip companies of tomorrow in less than 10 years, right? So
Yeah.
I think the cycle of innovation growth and kind of like scale is moving faster than it was even 30 years ago when I started my career,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's really exciting. But what about the investor base then? So like you've got this three-way need, right? You've got obviously, employees who want to find mission-driven places where they can go work, and well-funded companies or companies that have businesses that are growing, because the truth is that not everybody can be a bootstrap startup founder, right? Like that's not reality. But then, of course, what's the role that investors are playing in this? Obviously, investors want to make a return on their capital. This is clear, right? But do investors also have the mentality of like, look, not only are mission driven, but in tech at least, a lot of investors always talk about like, oh, you've got to be in certain geographic locations because you need access to the very, very best talent. You've got to have the very, very best talent. I think that the space of alternative proteins, even 5 years ago, was not very well understood by the investor community. They're just like, well, I'm just going to give you money because this category seems to be going up, right? Whereas you can see in like the more seasoned digital investors, they really know what they're looking for in terms of the talent in the founder team, the talent in the board, the talent in like the middle management ranks. I think that the investor group drives a lot of that. They say, look, I'm going to give you a bunch of money, but you better go hire very good people. Right? So what do you see on the investor side in terms of maybe maturation about their approach, about their input, about the amount of influence that they want to have in staffing? Is that changing also over the past couple of years?
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
so reassuring to work with companies that include their investment teams, their cap table, as
Mm.
part of the interview process, right?
Okay.
They are typically, not always, but it is typical to see that they come from some area of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
They can lend their expertise and influence. They can support decisions. They can add contrarian views when needed. But at the end of the day, it is always super helpful to have the voice and the feedback and the overall know-how of some of these more experienced investors, because we know that they have a portfolio that they're working with. They've seen some of these obstacles that the current company in question has seen or maybe going through at that point in time.
Mm.
So to have that support system built in and to incorporate that into the hiring process is something really reassuring. That said, that's not always the case. As we saw, earlier this year, I think SVB was a good example of what happens when we overindulge. Right. We had a convergence of biotech investment into traditional food production with overinflated expectations of valuation.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, that is a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Food is food, right? Traditional food companies are always going to receive 1.5, 2x valuation, and that's where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I know that the average consumer, when they go shopping, they're not typically concerned about the methodologies of production of their food. They're worried about value, taste, and what the brand stands for. So getting those messages across are vitally important. I know there's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's part of the investment opportunity is to align yourself with an investor that can think and see abstractly and see into the future about what's going to happen. And I think we are at a position now where a lot of these companies are facing a huge dilemma, right? We're pivoting from our market approach from retail to food service. And we know that food service is not going to retain the same amount of revenue that retail is. But how do you get into retail if you don't have the structure, the infrastructure, the team behind you, even the strategics within your team and board of investors to get you in the right direction? So it is an uphill challenge for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the kind of entrepreneurial and innovation struggle of all industries. I don't think that it's unique to the plant-based protein space. I mean, everybody wants to have enthusiasm, right? Like no one invests in stuff that they're not enthusiastic about. So in the moment, you become very enthusiastic. And I think there was a little bit of over-enthusiasm there. But I have to say that I think a lot of these products, at least from a taste perspective, although some of them are not great, are coming along really well. I was actually just in Frankfurt yesterday at the Food Ingredients Europe show. And typically, actually, at these ingredients shows, they don't give out a lot of samples. There's not a lot of sampling done, right? Like because like a lot of food ingredients are kind of boring, but
Sure.
many of these stands had chefs there producing their meat alternative, options. And some of them were very good, right? I mean, I've been doing this now for a couple of years. I've had a chance to test and try different ones. And I thought some of them are like, I mean, of course, if you really are put to the test of like, is A/B testing meat or not meat? Probably I would still be able to figure out which one was not meat. But it's completely
Yeah.
pleasant experience to eat these things. And, like I don't really care if it's not meat. It's like, is it good? Right. And so
Exactly.
I think that the resilience of the industry has to play out, right? And there was a little bit of, I think there was a little bit of overpromising that went on, particularly through 2020, 2021, marketing. And I think unfortunately consumers, particularly in North America, just seem to be a little bit flat and like, yeah, you told me that story before. But now many of these products I think will start to speak for themselves because I think in certain applications they do work pretty well, at least from my experience. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
agree. I think seeing all the chefs get in the mix is super exciting because that wasn't the case years ago. It was, it was a science project, and that's ultimately what landed on the plate was a science project.
Right.
Now we knew, but now it's being voiced a little bit more actively. Is the importance of taste and presentation and quality and versatility.
Mm,
So those things, respectfully, can't be done by a scientist. We need
right.
chefs with a certain caliber to understand the product, understand how to use it cross-functionally. Do we want to
Mm,
make this into something that could be, plated at a quick service restaurant? Is this something that we want people to be able to use at home, or is
mm,
this something that we want, a tweezer dinner to be prepared with?
right.
So I think, personally speaking, it is super reassuring to see the chefs behind those counters at a lot of these events sampling their products.
Yeah. No, it was great. Okay, so what about that? Like, what about maybe what role do you see yourself, or maybe just observations you have in maybe the effort of not repeating that cycle again, like of like this is sometimes people talk about this like alternative plant 2.0, like this or alternative meat 2.0, like what is the next generation of products? Because you've got a lot more investment, a lot more competition, a lot more just people out there working on a similar problem, and that's bound to create better results, of course. Um, but transparency then becomes an issue, right? Transparency and truth. And so, like, if you're recruiting someone into a company, do you ever do or think about doing diligence on what is really the veracity of the value proposition they're making? Of course, taste is one thing. You can taste the product, of course, that's fine. But I think that there's been, a little bit of, how do I want to say this? It's like, what is the real impact on the environment? What is the real trade-off? What is the real transparency of the calculation? Everyone says, well, it's different and it's sustainable. Great, let's go ahead. But I do always think that the industry needs to continue to stand up and really quantify their supply chain and what that means, which is hard in any industry. It's very difficult to do this. So do you find that there are companies out there that are doing that well and like really bringing that mission towards the market and towards their employees, and others that are doing it less well? Are there some that, of course, don't name any names, that are maybe exaggerating those aspects of their company in order to attract talent or attract customers? Like, what do you see going on out there?
You named all three areas that are happening
Yeah,
perfectly. There's companies that are doing it really well, right?
yeah,
They're focusing on the culture internally. They're focusing on the employer brand. How do we attract the right talent, right?
mm,
What's the message that we're putting out to attract people to want to work with us?
mm,
I think that there's going to be a challenge for some of the less experienced founders
mm,
that are new to this space, because this formula, unlike traditional CPG, hasn't been written yet. And we're still trying to figure that out. So without that experience, without that understanding of trial and error, and if you are bootstrapping, how many times do you get up to the plate and have a swing at it? So I
mm,
think there are going to be a lot of closures coming up soon. I think
mm,
we're in the beginning of it, and I think over the next 2 years, we're going to see a lot of startups either be acquired or shut their doors. because they don't have enough funding, they don't have the experience, they haven't brought on the right people to help scale the business in the way that they need to. And going back to your earlier question, I think that's something that investors need to see from the beginning, right? They need to see that, hey, this is some of the challenges that we are going to be facing. They have probably faced them before. If we're working with early, less experienced founders, what can we do now to support them? And to your point, yeah, bring on the talent that can help scale, help drive change in a way that is effective and that makes sense for what they're trying to accomplish, and those commitments that they made to their stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah, I think that it's encouraging, of course, to see, because all those things maybe to the outward observer seem like negatives, but I think that those are just signs of a maturing category, right? Like you don't go from, zero to hero. It just doesn't happen, right? Like there's always something that goes on that, like like shakeouts, right? And I think this happens in all other areas of innovation regularly. Like, smaller companies or, even bigger ones get funding, they get it kind of wrong, and then they decide that they're either going to close shop or they're going to get acquired. And, there's even acquisitions that might happen for talent reasons, right? Because particularly in the CPG industry, I think that at the end of the day, the winners ultimately end up being the people that have the distribution relationships already, right? Because it's so difficult to build, pathway into retailers and into, food service providers. So if you're a large company already, that's a fantastic platform for you to, get a new technology out there. It just so happens that those same companies are not the greatest ones at making new product because they don't have this culture of trying and making mistakes and things like that. So I think that it's kind of been that way throughout history in the CPG industry. Unfortunately, everything leads back to the mothership in a way. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
people try to escape the big companies, and then they might end up back in them somehow.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's tough. I mean, it's such a challenging space to get into, right? 90% of food companies fail. I think that's the number right now. And we look at it as how can we lend a hand in mitigating that number?
Mm-hmm.
And by building the right teams with experience, by taking folks from those larger corporates that understand the pathing of an early stage company to get to that point of profitability.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's probably universal fault in a lot of other industries, but I don't necessarily think there are as many industries that have such a high failure rate. So I think it's important that companies know what their differentiator is and they capitalize on it. And if it's not working, they need to pivot and adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Maybe I can ask you now a question that's I think it's pertaining to your business and your experience, but it's something that I also feel is like what your impact is on the industry. Maybe I'll just explain kind of the struggle that I go through as the leader of FlavorWiki. I'm constantly asked to kind of enter these, ranking contests and things like, where, they're trying to like basically map the industry and the startups and things in it, which I think is a great thing. But almost always these questionnaires or these interrogations about your contribution or your sustainability or whatever come down to, well, what are you contributing to the overall mission of, food innovation, making the planet, cleaner, healthier, et cetera. And at the end of the day, like we do research, right? Like we just help companies. We're like a very small component of the entire puzzle of all of this. Yeah, I think it's an important component, of course, but it's not as if we're the people producing the thing that's solving the problem, but we're supporting those people. And I typically don't know how to answer that question. I'm a bit cynical about it. I just say, well, look, do they need companies to do research so they can be successful? We believe they do. Is it possible that they could be successful without doing research? That's totally possible, right? Is it less likely that they'll be successful? Yes, it is. But nevertheless, we're not the rock stars. Like we're not the front man in the band, right? Like we're in the back, doing some sort of supportive role. So how do you think about your direct contribution to bringing the industry forward? Like, for example, if you weren't around, like what would be happening and how would these problems be solving? So do you ever think about that? I don't think about it all the time, but whenever I have to answer one of these questionnaires, I'm always kind of vexed by there's no space for me to talk about how I'm contributing because all the questions relate to a company that's producing a product or producing a core technology, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we are a resource for a number of different things, but primarily what we do is we work with companies at a business critical, time sensitive state that need a position that is crucial to the progression of their product, their team, their culture, whatever it is, and to find that person. And typically, those people who are that top layer of candidate, that A+ player, they're not looking, they're not scrolling on LinkedIn looking for jobs. They're in a position where they can make a decision that's best for them and their families when it comes to making that change. And they get propositioned with these different positions when someone like myself or my partner Dave taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, this is who I am. This is the space I work in. And we may have something that you might find interesting. Our part of our process, though, is to understand what's important to them first before we go and propose this company and showcase the company that we're working for, to make sure that ideologies are aligned. And once we have that, then we can introduce the company, going through a little bit of the process here. But to rewind a little bit, what we do can be done within an organization. It's done all the time, right? However, at an earlier stage, when your infrastructure isn't built out to support the recruitment efforts to find the quality of candidate that you're looking for, it's going to be very difficult to find that person on your own. You don't have the time. You're a founder wearing multiple hats. You're doing 100 different things each day. Your task list gets larger and larger with each breathing moment, as I'm sure you know personally. So are we a necessity? I think so. I think that if you want your team to be of the best caliber possible, and you want to find that hard to find passive talent that is not looking for their next opportunity because they're in such a great and comfortable space, but you have something exciting and revolutionary, then how are you going to find them? Then that's exactly what we do.
Yeah. You just don't have time to do it, right? Like you think you do, you go from being a one-man entrepreneur or just a couple of people in a founding team, and where you do have to do everything, and then you carry that mentality a little bit with you, and then you think, oh, I could do that, or I could do this, and it just turns out that actually you don't have time to do it, even though you probably could figure out a way to get it done on some level, right? Maybe not as good,
tough.
but
We speak to a lot of folks who they go on LinkedIn first, and we'll say, well, what kind of response did you get? Say, oh, well, we had 556 responses to this post for this job. Like, well, that's
like 99% not fitting.
Right. Not only that, but how do you go through 556 resumes with a level of attention to detail of what you're looking for? Right.
Yeah, it's just not. It's and then you end up, as you say, like if you lose a couple of months where you don't have that person working for you or working in the team, you kind of set yourself back, right? And that's I think that's where this mentality I referenced before of the investors are saying, oh, you need to have like access to the most incredible talent, because they know that moving quickly is of the essence. And if you just sort of piddle around a little bit and you don't make those decisions quickly, or if you don't get the best people that you can possibly get, it puts you at a significant disadvantage for the long run, right? And of course, because they're investors, they have the money, and they're kind of, their attitude is a bit like, well, if things are going well and you need more money because you had to hire really great people, well, that's fine, I have more money for you, right? Like that's kind of their attitude.
It's a good problem for them.
Yeah. So I think that, and I think it's good to see that dynamic now starting in the food innovation space, because I think it means that it's, as I said, it's maturing versus people just sort of throwing darts at a dartboard and saying, I need to be on the next big trend, otherwise I'm going to miss it. And I think that's a little bit of the froth that probably happened in the last couple of years. Yeah. So good. So what do you think about automation, AI, these types of things? I mean, those are not the roles that I think that you're dealing with, like people that are mixing a salad at Sweetgreen or whatever those roles are. But what do you think about, food is as you said, it's a value proposition business. Taste, value for money are critical items. And there's going to have to be continued optimization of the supply chain from a cost basis because interest rates will, continue to cause inflation. Energy prices are not going down. There's going to be more demand for food, even though we probably have an overabundance of actual food in the world. It's not really delivered in the right way. So costs will continue to go up as we've seen, I think, in the last year, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about the influence of, mechanization, robotics, AI, these types of things in the food industry, replacing either key decision makers or decision-making talent, or even people that are, working an assembly line or production line, right?
Yeah. Starting from the back end of there, I think AI and robotics are going to be a huge advantage for quick service restaurants moving forward, and maybe even, casual fine dining at some point in time.
Mm.
The two largest costs in restaurant operation,
Mhm.
payroll and costly and food cost.
Mhm.
So if you can limit your labor by having automated fryers and flippers and kiosks that do the ordering for you, one less server, one less cook, one less prep cook, one less line cook, those numbers really add up. And when you're talking about an industry that has razor thin margins to begin with,
Mhm.
shaving off a point or 2 points here and there is exciting to a lot of folks. So I'm excited about watching it from the sidelines now for sure, but it's certainly something that I've had my eye on for some time, about timing of when we want to start looking at that as a new vertical within AltCollective as well.
Oh, really? In
Yeah.
what way would you get into that vertical in your area? How do you see that developing as an opportunity?
So as the demand for some of these different AI tools and some of the
Mhm.
different robotics come, there's going to be a lot of need for production of them.
Mhm.
And one thing I didn't mention earlier, I should have, most of the roles that we work on are early stage R&D tech roles, engineering roles.
Mhm.
So very complex roles that come with a lot of ingenuity, a lot of precision that some people will find it very challenging to hire for,
Mhm.
especially when you're creating new technology and new innovation, right? We're not plugging and playing someone that's quitting and putting in a new person into this role from another organization. We're
Mhm.
hiring people that have the capability, or so we hope they do, based on the parameters of the search, to create new technologies. And
Mhm.
that is a much different search in most cases.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I can imagine that you're correct, is that you're basically like data scientists, for example, or even like technicians that would be able to run something like an automated production line. Of course, those types of people exist in like the car industry, obviously, these types of industries that have been, more automated for years. But you also have to have understandings of things like food safety and like line management. Like, so there's kind of like a combination of skill sets which are not out there as part of university program X, right? They're just not, they just haven't formed yet. And so I think that, yeah, like the roles become more, even like the quote unquote like lower skilled roles become much more technical over time, right? When you're dealing with something like that. I also think it's the case, like for example, for research, is that it'll become much more of a data management and data analytics type of a role, because you'll have to understand how to deal with machine learning algorithms and,
Yep.
interface with a team that's doing that and things like this. But those teams that are doing a lot of that machine learning and coding, they're not knowledgeable of things like sensory science and consumer, insights and things like this. So you have these very kind of cross roles, which I've seen that young people are very excited to do that because they're more forward thinking in their content, but they're at least still leveraging maybe something that they had studied in school, which probably is indicative of the path they wanted to take as a professional anyway, right? So those evolutions, I think, are probably natural, right? Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
very well said.
And I can totally see how that would be very hard to find those people, right?
Yeah.
Because you either have to train them on the job and teach them the part of the job that they don't know, or you have to try to find them someplace,
Well,
right?
I would even counter that in some cases saying that they won't have the skills to train this person,
Mhm.
right? This is maybe, what if it's a commercial founder building out their R&D team?
Yeah.
uh, how do they know,
Yeah.
right? They have this great back of the napkin idea, and they just got funded, X millions of dollars,
Yeah.
and now it's time to build a prototype. They have to assume that the people that they're talking to know what they're building. So it is really difficult at that early stage to assemble these teams in the most effective way possible.
That's interesting. As we're coming down to the last couple of minutes, what do you think about continuing education in that regard then? I mean, can ongoing education is also obviously a big industry. I mean, I don't live in the US, but I think that even like traditional university is slowly slipping away as a core tenet of people's career path, right? Like, getting like a 4-year master's or 4-year bachelor's degree and then a master's. Of course, it's super valuable. I mean, I don't think that the value of that should be discounted, but because so much of this is multidisciplinary, one might realize that in fact shorter periods of education throughout your career may be more of the relevant model. Like, do you ever deal with people that come to you and say, look, I really want to get into this part of the industry and I've currently been doing this for 5 years. And you tell them like, well, look, you don't have this particular skill set, which would really make you unique or which would get you in the door. And do you ever end up talking to them about what they could possibly do to enhance their core learning background? Right.
I would say on a weekly basis, I have a similar conversation to that
Okay.
with folks who reach out that are looking for the next step in their career, but just don't know how to really get there.
Yeah.
And I think continuing education, certificate programs are excellent tool to help them. And then from an organizational side, if you have a team of people that are willing and capable and able to perform tasks already, I
Mhm.
would always encourage someone that has that passion to be trained up to upskill themselves and allow them to learn these new tools, resources, as opposed from hiring from outside.
Right.
I think that it's important to have that buy-in already, the understanding of what they're working on and the use cases that they're going to be working on it for. Make a whole lot of sense when it's possible. Is it always possible? No, but if you can do it, absolutely do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, I don't know if you have kids, but I have kids. And like, I just think about like, what is the working world going to be like in 25 years? I don't think that having like this 4-year college education is, of course, I think that's great to have it. I mean, it's not like I'm saying you shouldn't, but I just wonder whether or not that's really going to be super duper relevant. And it's going to be more about what you know, what you've done. And then obviously you have to have you have to be smart. You have to know math and probably even more complex, calculations than you would in today's world. But yeah, I don't know, going to frat parties and for 4 years, I'm not sure
Yeah,
that's really like
it's
the future of
it's
education.
it's. I was just having this conversation the other day, and it's the response overwhelmingly was no. Teach
Yeah.
them how to be an electrician.
Mhm.
Teach them how to be a plumber.
Mhm.
So it's some of those more technical skills that are going to take people a lot further than a traditional 4-year degree.
Yeah, and then you just basically come out being a great student, right? I think
Again, not
particularly,
advocating one way or the other. I think
yeah.
personal preference and where you want to go is important. But yeah, in some cases, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, cool. Anything else you want to add? I mean, I think I definitely have known about you guys for about a year or more now, and it seems like you really have come along and are developing your model and your approach. So I think certainly the industry is there. Anything else you want to add? Like, I mean, maybe other verticals that you're thinking of going into? I mean, alternative meat and alternative protein is a big one, but there's a lot of other areas of I think ag tech and things like this that are coming up where there's very similar staffing issues that are I think
Yeah.
going to take place. You have traditional companies and traditional sort of, so many decades of learning, say for example in the ag space, but you need to have that, but you also need to have, different skills as well to bring that forward from a, technology perspective, right?
We've recently discussed this as well, and we funnel right back up to our core or thesis of why we're doing this, and it's working with mission-driven companies looking to change. I'm sorry, to secure our food system, And now we're extending it to climate. So climate tech is definitely going to be an area that we're looking at. Ag tech, certainly going to be an area that we're looking at. But I think for the next foreseeable future, we're really focused on working and getting our name out there in the alternative protein space. Will we take on roles and work with companies that are in those other two sectors? Absolutely. And we have. But I think our marketing language right now is really focused in food.
Great. Well, congratulations. Sounds like you guys are making it happen. And it's been great talking. I obviously want to stay in touch and, probably see you at some, shows and events, from time to time. But yeah, I think it's important what you're doing for the industry. And I can think even off the top of my head, a bunch of people that I even know who are probably, wouldn't mind moving into different areas of the industry. And I think that it's exciting, right? I think it's only going to accelerate everything forward more and more for everyone. Right?
And like you said, I mean, it's fun for us, and I'm sure for you to be on the sidelines and serve as a consultant, as a coach, and really watch these founders take their leaps and really make a difference in our food system. So, thanks for having me. Really appreciated being here. It was a great show. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.